board and, you know, anything that relates to CAB as well. So I'm Courtney Eaton. I've been serving as the chair of the board since January, I believe, although I can't remember the exact month. And I work in, I'm a civil engineer. I work in water and wastewater, particularly in wastewater, just a fabulous topic. Though I enjoy it. And I kind of bring into that sustainable infrastructure. I Envision Certified, which is a sustainable infrastructure rating system similar to LEED, but it's for infrastructure rather than for buildings. And I happen to be in San Diego right now, working on a project related to that. So that's sort of my interest in the board is how can we make our infrastructure systems in Concord more sustainable. So with that, I'll pass it along. And just so I make a note, John, I have you on for notes. You good with that? Okay, good.
Yeah.
All right. Well, if you want to go next, and then you can pick someone when you're done. How about that?
Sure. Yes, I'm John Baldock. I think I'm in my last year on the board. I recently retired from the city of Cambridge, where I was doing climate planning for a long time. So now I'm teaching a class on sustainability at BU in the Met College and doing a little consulting.
Great.
I'll pass to Brian.
I had to find the unmute. Brian Crouch, 49 Indian Pipeline, served on various environmental related boards over the past 20 years or so. I was just looking at my electrical bill. September was the first time I actually bought electricity from Concord after several months of a run of just net production. So I was a little disappointed to see that, but now I got to work on my heating and so forth.
That's great.
Yeah, it was a good run. I'll go to Brad.
Yeah, I'm Brad Hubbard Nelson. I'm really happy to join this group, and I've been a Concord resident 20 years, and I'm a retired physicist. I've met a couple of you before, but I'm looking forward to getting to know everybody better. And I was on CSEC for much of the last 7 years and really enjoyed some of the programs that we ran, including the Cooler Concord stuff and the Heat Smart, the Heat Smart program. And so I really like, I enjoyed working with that group. I like community engagement, but I also like a lot of things about emissions reduction, seeing whether we can move the needle. Let's see. I'm in my day job, which is volunteer. I work with a group called Mass Energize, which is helping Massachusetts communities with a web platform and playbooks and things to lower greenhouse gas emissions, and also the Heat Smart Alliance, which is specifically about heat pumps, which got born out of the Mass CEC Heat Smart program, all the communities that had been involved with that. So I like the community-based stuff. And I'm just looking forward to digging in and getting to know everybody at a personal and working level.
Excellent.
And I'll pick at random, Gavin.
All right, hi everyone, I'm Gavin. I recently graduated from Dartmouth College in the spring, where I studied government and sort of sustainability, energy related things. There's no set major, so I had to make my own in that way with those studies. Hopefully they'll change that soon. I grew up in Concord. I've lived in Concord for 18 years. I can't beat Brad's 20, but close. And I'm really interested in sustainable transportation and heat pumps, solar panels, you name it, honestly, everything. For my day job, I work in management consulting in Boston. And yeah, I'm looking forward to working with the team more in the future. All right, so let me go over to Ben.
Thank you, Gavin. So Ben Sladen, 135 Hillside Ave in Concord. New resident. I've lived in Concord for about 10 months now. I came over from Cambridge, but really I've lived across the US and Canada over the past 12 years or so. But I just had a baby 9 months ago, so we're putting down roots here. We're here for the long haul. We're very excited to be in Concord. We think it's a fantastic community. From a professional perspective, I run a business. It was a startup, but now we're off the ground. I'm focusing on decarbonizing gasoline consuming vehicles or the US transportation sector. Because, for example, only 600,000 electric vehicles were sold last year compared to 274 million CO2 emitting gasoline consuming vehicles. So the question is, what is society doing to decarbonize fuel consuming vehicles? And the answer is nothing. So that's where Karman comes in. And our vision is really to accelerate society to zero emission hydrogen fuel cell transportation, because electrics really aren't that much of an improvement for the environment either. It sounds great. The headlines sound great, but once you kind of peel back the veneer, it's like, it's an improvement, but we could do a lot better. So it's kind of one of those things where if we're going to make a change, well, let's make a real change type of thing. So that's why we're trying to accelerate and push to fuel cell transportation. So with that, I will pass it over to Erin.
Erin, you can hold for just a minute. Erin will introduce herself in a little bit. How about?
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah, sorry.
No worries. I think we got everyone on the board.
Yep.
As I mentioned, maybe for Brad's benefit, that Jake Swinson and Paul Cushion are out this evening. They weren't able to make the meeting, so we'll get them back next meeting. Just quickly go through some logistics, if you will. We sent out the meeting minutes from our September 2022 meeting. Hopefully everyone got a chance to take a look at those. Were there any comments or questions from those minutes for those of you who are able to review? All right. Well, hearing none, can I get a motion to approve the minutes from September 2022?
I move that we approve the minutes from our prior meeting.
Great. Is there a second?
A second.
Thanks, Ben. All in favor of approving the minutes, say aye.
Aye. Aye.
Or raise your hand. Maybe that's better on Zoom. I forget. Any abstain?
I will abstain.
Okay. And all right. So I think they stand approved as written. We'll get those up on the website once I figure out how I do that. Still learning these processes.
Send them to the town clerk's office.
I figured it was the same person that I sent the agenda to earlier this week. All right, so as I mentioned, we did talk about trying for in-person meetings in the fall here. And my apologies for having to shift the plan at the kind of the last minute, or I guess I gave you some warning. But I'd like to, revisit that again for possibly our November and December meetings. We'll just sort of take it maybe a month at a time, given it's hard to say what's going to happen with the state of disease or COVID. You can call it that. But just want to get maybe by a show of hands of the board members, if you are interested in doing interested and available to do the November meeting by in person. 1, 2, 3.
Can you remind me what day it was?
Oh yes, November 16th. So it'll be the week before Thanksgiving.
Yeah, I can do it.
Okay, all right. So it's like we could have most people in person. I understand there's a possibility for hybrid, but I think it gets a little tricky. so I'm sure that, I'm sure we could figure it out, but I would suggest maybe for this first go around, we just try for in-person only. I know there's a few committees that are meeting in person. So I will inquire about the space. I believe it'll be the space that we met in pre-COVID, which I think is the select board room, if I'm not mistaken. I could be wrong. Don't quote me on that, because it is being recorded. So, well, anyway, we'll figure out the space in town hall and, make sure that you all know about it. And then, of course, it'll be advertised normally. Good. All right. Well, with that, I have a small chairs update. Mine will never be able to rival a full director's update, but I can share, a little bit of what I know. And actually, Erin is quite involved in this as well. So since she happens to be on the call for the meeting tonight, feel free to chime in once I share what I know. But so at this point, we are continuing the sustainability director search. The first round of incoming resumes were not as strong, I think, as the previous two searches have been. So really didn't yield as many candidates as the search team was hoping for. Though we did identify a few and ask them to do a writing sample to help us get a little bit more feel for the candidates and their skills and their ideas as well. But then we put the call out again, essentially, or tried to, advertise it in different locations. I think got a few more interested candidates, a few more resumes. Still not a ton, but a few more. And out of that, I would say probably, 2 or 3 additional candidates of promise. So I think, I don't have the numbers right in front of me, but, and Erin, you can tell me, I think we're up to about, 6 candidates that we potentially 5 to 6 that we might bring in for an interview within the next couple of weeks.
Yeah, so we're hoping to start doing interviews next week, and we have, I think, 3 to 4 candidates that we're going to ask to come in for an initial interview for our first round. And then we're doing it sort of as we go. So if there are other candidates that come along and submit their application and they are fantastic and we can't wait to meet them, then we'll bring them into the process as well. So we're continuing on and hoping to meet those, do those first interviews next week.
So that's the update there. It would be great if we, out of this round of candidates, we find someone who just knocks it out of the park. Because I do think that that position being vacant is definitely, leading to just things not being able to move forward in the same way. It's just hard for anyone else to pick up that torch and the number of things that fall under the sustainability director's provisions. So anyway, so everyone's motivated, but at the same time, making sure that we're finding the right person to fill that role. Brian, you had a question?
So I'm sorry, was it 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 that we're going to bring 3 or 4 of 5 and 6?
4 initially, and then there's a couple of other candidates promising that might be pulled in if needed.
And are the 3 to 4 like they're pretty good, or are we pretty excited about them? I'm just worried because it sounded like last time, we didn't quite get the robust set of candidates that we did previously, and I'm just trying to suss out where we stand there.
I can probably speak from my assessment. I don't want to put that on the whole group, but I'd say they have strengths. I don't know that they are as strong as the candidates in the previous 2 searches when Amanda and Kate were hired, though I did not actually look at any of those resumes myself, so I can't personally compare. Erin, you might be able to speak more to that. And maybe just for the group's sake, would you want to introduce yourself so that they all know who you are and why you know this information?
The mystery person, yeah. Yeah, I'm Erin Stevens. I'm the town's, sorry, almost went to the old one. I'm the transportation and mobility planner. I'm also still partially doing my previous role as the town's communication, public information and communications manager. So you may know me from that, but I'm now doing transportation planning. And I worked closely with both Kate Hanley and Amanda Cohn, so and helped in the hiring process for both of them. So am once again involved in this process to try to find us another strong candidate. I think that the people who have applied so far have varying backgrounds, and they're backgrounds that bring other strengths to the table. So I think that while they may be different candidates, I don't think that different is necessarily going to be a bad thing. I think it'll be a different experience. And it could also be that, not everybody puts everything on their resume. And there could be, sometimes you speak to somebody in an interview and they shine through with some, hidden talent or skill or a job that you didn't know about because they thought, well, I didn't think that'd be as impressive as the, when I was the CEO of some company. But you really, that grassroots community organizing was, really the thing that pulled them in for us, or, something like that. So I think that even though they have, so far the candidates have had varying backgrounds from both Kate and Amanda, I think that I'm hopeful that there's a good candidate in the pool for us.
Right.
Right.
I wanted to ask, I helped screen some resumes in the last hire, and I'd be willing to help out in any way I could, if it was reading resumes or participating in interviews. I want to offer that.
Great.
Thanks, Brad.
I don't know who's the decider on that. Maybe it's the town manager.
I think that Carrie has sort of put together the panel of people who are doing it based on who was available at the start of the process.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean that we can't bring you in at another point. So it's really good to know that you are available, and I can speak to Carrie about that and let her know that you are an option for a panelist or resumes going forward, things like that.
I will say the candidates that we're considering bringing in for interview, they all had a really strong, writing sample, I guess what we're calling. We asked them to answer, 3 particular questions, and a lot of it was related to sort of priorities and ideas that they would bring to the table as they started the position. And I thought all of them had some interesting and thoughtful ideas. So I think that's good. Ben, good question or comment?
Yes, ma'am. Just out of curiosity for my learning as well, are we using an outside search firm to help supplement our efforts? So I know Sudbury is using Community Paradigm Associates to help fill out some of their roles. So just curious if we're kind of doing the same as a neighboring town.
So we only usually use search firms for positions like the town manager or the library director that really have a very specialized role. So for something, it could be that if we weren't to find the right candidate for this position, that we might work with a search firm, but typically those are reserved for those sort of bigger departmental heads rather than a manager level.
All right, cool. Thanks, Erin.
And Brian, did you have another question, or is your hand?
I forgot to put it down.
Okay, just wanted to make sure.
This is a director level hire. So that's a pretty high level, right?
It is, but it's at a division manager level. So it's called the director, similar to the director of natural resources.
Yeah.
But the director of natural resources is a division manager as opposed to a department head, like the assistant town manager or the director of public works, things like that, that have multiple divisions under them.
Okay.
That's helpful. I'm glad you were here to answer that because I could not have. So that's great. Let's see. So, Brian, I was wondering, actually, it's not so much my update, but I was wondering if you could do a recap, if you wouldn't mind, not to put you on the spot, of how the first efforts went for Kicks for Cancer, just because we mentioned it at the last meeting that this was happening, and it was the first year to try this, to do, compost and recycling at a pretty large event, public event. Not to say that doesn't happen, but it was very purposeful. I don't know if you want to share anything related to that.
Sure. Just very briefly, one thing we've realized, and we've had a couple large events in town, Kicks for Cancer is an all-day soccer tournament with hundreds, maybe thousands of people attending. The Mighty Moose is a 5K the next morning. That is also a very large event with over 1,000 runners, almost 2,000, where we realized we don't really have a lot of good infrastructure to support, just basic recycling and composting at these large events. And these are not things that are going to change the trajectory of the climate plan or anything, but are good things to both just do and also to help socialize with people, just remembering that composting isn't hard as long as you know what to put in what bin. So we had volunteers, including Courtney, assist my wife, help people basically make sure stuff is getting the right bins and help educate people lightly on composting, that sort of thing. And we actually, my wife got a really nice note from, and we're doing in honor of Peter, who is also honored Kicks for Cancer, who those of you who don't know him, succumbed to brain cancer in the past year. And his wife sent Madeline a really nice note that she was really touched that we had done this, because Peter was the king of compost, and rode his bike to school and really walked the walk in terms of sustainability. So it was really touched, by that. That alone, that made it totally worth anything. My small contributions to the effort, but just going forward, I think this is again a small thing, but it's also not hard to do. Is think about how we can have better support at some of the large events that we do have, town meeting, elections, whatever, to do a little bit better job on kind of the recycling and compost, particularly.
Yeah, I thought just adding to that, I thought it was a great opportunity to educate. Your wife had thought about making it very prominent, right? So it was pretty out there, so that you couldn't miss it. But I thought it was a great way to educate people, especially as we're trying the compost piloting at a number of different, a few different town sites, right? The school has one in addition to a couple of other spots. But, I think it's a great way to demystify that process for people who might be, either very unfamiliar or questioning or suspicious, whatever, of how that works. So love to see that happen again. And, brief conversation that I had with Madeline when we were there on site is, whether our board and or CSEC, might be able to have some interactions with the high school green teams and climate groups, which we've talked about as a board before. So more to come on that. Try to get that conversation going and see what we might be able to just transfer of information or opportunities we might be able to explore there. Let's see. So the last thing I just wanted to ask about, really. So we were, given the absence of a sustainability director currently, we were invited to the school committee sustainability committee. It's both names there. And I wanted to check, Brad, do you sit on that committee? I noticed your name on the distribution list.
I have, I wasn't there last month, but I certainly have been on that. And I'm willing to do it again if need be.
I guess I would love to have a liaison, and I don't know that I can take it on consistently. Brian offered to stand in, and then through my own confusion didn't get him the link in time. So, but I think, at least in the interim until a director is a new director is hired and is up to speed, I think it'd be really helpful to have one of our board members sitting in on those. They are at, hang on, is it 4 o'clock on a Thursday? Is the meeting time, which is difficult for me. I know.
Can't hear.
You can't hear me?
It's a little muted. It's kind of going in and out.
Okay. Better?
Yep.
I'm trying to talk louder, but I don't know if it's just the volume of my voice. Well, Brad, if you'd be willing and interested, I would love to take you up on that. At least until the sustainability director is hired and in place, because I feel like it's an important committee for us to have representation on. And if you aren't able to in a particular month, maybe just pull the group to see if someone else can step in.
Sure.
Okay. Great. All right. Well, with that, I don't have anything else. Typically, I'll give you anything that I hear from the chair's breakfast, which usually happens on the third Wednesday of the month, which is today. However, they pushed it till next week, so I don't have updates from that to share, but I can do so via email next week after the meeting. All right. Well, with that, we're a little ahead of schedule. I don't know, Erin, is Nick still planning to join? Is he on? I haven't scrolled down here. Let's see that he's on.
I don't see Nick on. I think he was planning on joining, but I can always get started, and he can jump in when he gets here. I'm sure he'll have plenty to say after I've given some information as well. So
okay. Well, just I'll give a quick kind of talk slowly through a quick intro of why we asked Erin and Nick Pappas, who hopefully will join here soon. He may be waiting for the 7:40, which I appreciate. So, we've been focusing on some of the initiatives that came out of the Climate Action Plan, and just, I guess, to revisit this very briefly for the new board members. We talked about this a little bit last meeting. After the plan was in place, we combed through all the initiatives and really focused on or summarized the ones that we felt were either in CAB's area of responsibility-ish or under the sustainability division's responsibility. And then sort of match those or prioritize them, I should say. Looking at the ones that we felt were ones that we could affect or move forward. We tried to prioritize those, and what came out of that were about 4. So we also matched those with our capacity as a group, what we thought we could take on. Now, that being said, there's a lot more in the Climate Action Plan, a lot of other initiatives. And one in particular that had come to my attention a few months ago in the chair breakfast in particular, Nick was actually sharing about the transportation roadmap, we'll call it. And it piqued my interest because I know that one of our sections in the Climate Action Plan relates to mobility and access around Concord and how that dovetails with climate. So I put on my list to have them come to our meeting and talk about it. And this is really the first time we've had a chance to do that. So invited Erin and Nick to come and talk with us. But then I thought, as just hopefully as an aid to our discussion, on the second page of our packet, I pulled out the actions that were listed in the Climate Action Plan related to mobility. And, so they're much prettier in the Climate Action Plan, so I encourage you to go look there. But I just thought, for purposes of our conversation, to make sure that everyone sort of was looking at what I had pulled out to remind us. There were really 4 priority actions related to mobility. This is a brief action description, and then there was a champion or set of champions identified. So in other words, who in town, what department or group would sort of spearhead moving along the initial actions, and the initial actions are listed here. There's a whole lot more information on each of the blueprint pages for these, but this just gives you a kind of brief overview. And I think what struck me as I was putting it together is that there's some things that are already well underway, if not completed. And I think Erin might be able to speak to some of that tonight. But there's still action to be done. And so the question is, what sort of opportunity and or support can CAB provide to the Transportation Advisory Committee or others related to some of these actions to keep these initiatives moving forward. And, I was tickled then when I met with Ben and with Gavin. Both board members have expressed an interest, as you heard tonight, in transportation planning and more sustainable transportation overall. So anyway, I think there's, some opportunity. That being said, I think I like this effort of kind of going back through the plan and figuring out, at least at a high level, reminding ourselves what our action is and, where we're headed. So I'm hopeful that we can do this with the other priority action plans and kind of follow this same lead for our, some of our future climate action board meetings. So we'll see how this one goes and go from there. But with that, did I buy enough time? I don't think Nick is on yet, but
you're pretty close. He might show up soon.
Okay. All right. Well, with that, I'll go ahead and turn it over to Erin. And if there's anything you want to share on the screen,
sure. Yeah.
You're welcome to. I can stop my screen share.
Okay, great. Yeah, I can share the roadmap. So I also just want to mention that Laura Davis, who's a member of the Transportation Advisory Committee, is also on with us today. Okay. So thanks for joining us, Laura. So we, as a Transportation Advisory Committee, came up with a set of goals that we called our roadmap. And it's sort of the guiding how we want to be moving forward when the Transportation Advisory Committee started. It was essentially a new committee, not quite sure where they wanted to go. They had this directive from the select board to start working on transportation, but it was fairly broad and they wanted to sort of map out where they wanted to go. So I will go ahead and share my screen so you can see this. So this is the roadmap that we came up with. So what we have here is our longer term things, our immediate work, and sort of our overarching themes that we want to be looking at. Some of the things that have already been started or have been sort of more or less completed. Nothing's ever truly complete, but we like to think that, we've reached a point where we can at least check the box and say that we've completed it. So some of the things that we have done in the short term are we have documented with Laura's help the public transportation options that are here in Concord. We know that they are expanding and shifting, and those might change, but we have those all documented. And with the help of our UNH Sustainability Fellow, Josh, this summer, he helped put that all together into a website, which I did a little bit of tweaking and reformatting to make it easy to navigate between the pages. And now if you go to concordma.gov/transit, you see all the different opportunities that we have for public transportation. I'm working on doing a couple of other things before we add it to one of the drop-down menus on the front page of the website, just so that we make sure we have everything up and all the information is correct before we broadcast it too loudly. Some of the other things that we did, which was a longer term project, was to hire a transportation planner. So I'm here now. And so that's another good checkbox, and hopefully it stays as a nice big checkbox. Some of the other things that we are starting to work on or have already started are things like looking at different bus service routes. For instance, we started the trolley project this year. That's a pilot project that is running from connecting the MBTA station and in Concord Center to our major tourist destinations in town, whether that be the North Bridge, the Orchard House, the Concord Museum, to allow people to visit Concord without needing to bring a car with them. So we see that as sort of a really good first step towards looking at more sort of fixed route services. It's not perfect, it's our pilot project, but we're really excited that we got it off the ground, and it's a learning experience, and we'll continue to hopefully learn with funding. I'm working with other, we have regional partners, other towns that are also working on doing some public ride share services and things like that. So I'm working with our regional partners to try to figure out the best way to do that and to best serve Concord. In terms of the complete streets, so I'm currently working on a proposal for a study for a comprehensive transportation plan that would be taking a look at not only our complete streets needs and making sure that we have that connectivity and we have the ability for people to use multimodal transportation, but that we are really taking a look at the complete streets prioritization plan that was done in 2017, making sure that those projects that are already on there stay on there, but also seeing, are there other areas that maybe weren't mentioned the first time around, or things that have come up since, connection points. If there's two projects that are fantastic projects, but there's nothing connecting them in the middle, then we want to make sure that we can make those connection points. So that's going to be a larger study and a larger process, and we're just starting to get that off the ground now. And along with that comes things like the road safety, figuring out what projects to prioritize, developing those criteria, things like that, figuring out funding. But so those are the things that we've already started to do. Obviously, there's many other things that are on this list and are going to come up over time. So this was our sort of an initial foray into creating our goals. I think that so far we've made a pretty good dent in what we want to accomplish, and really starting to start a lot of those conversations, which is obviously the first step in a very long process. And, finding low or no carbon ways for people to get around town is very close to my heart, and something that I find very important and want to make sure that we are doing a good job of, but also making sure that no matter what way people choose to get around town, they are able to do it safely. So that's kind of where we are right now. Let me stop sharing that. I have another quick thing. This just has a few of our so this just has a little bit more information on it. So up in the upper right-hand corner is Go Concord. So that is going to be our sort of overarching transportation brand that was made with our regional partners in Sudbury and Acton and a few other neighboring towns to sort of create this regional collaborative and this regional idea of it's not about one type of transportation. It's about getting people where they need to go. So all the different towns are going to have the same sort of idea, so that we can create this overarching idea of mobility within the region, which is really exciting. As of Monday, we have a hybrid trolley. It's no longer the minibus, which is very exciting. This has been something that I've known was coming for a while and had to keep quiet. So I'm thrilled that I can finally tell people about it. So we're really excited about that. It has a bike rack. It's a hybrid vehicle. It's low to the ground. It's ADA accessible. And it has a larger capacity as well, so that we could theoretically be bringing even more people around if we suddenly get a spike in the last month for the leaf peeping and things like that. But some of the other things I want to point out are the Concord Bike Share has been doing really well. We're excited about that. We've had 403 individual rides, or riders rather. We've had on the Concord Trolley an average of 50 rides per week with some missing data in there, so that could be a little bit higher. And some of the other things I already spoke about, but I just wanted to point out those couple of wins. We also have 21 town vehicles that are either hybrid or electric, and that's actually out of date because we just had another one from the police department arrive today. So now we have 22, and they continue to, as things become older or are taken out of service, looking at hybrid or electric options for those vehicles. And there's also the Drive EV program, which I wish I could take credit for because they do a great job, but I really like this ad that they did. So I put that on there as well. And you can enter to win an $88 gift card. So make sure you go to their website and check it out.
What is the Drive EV program?
What is the Drive EV program?
Yeah.
So it is a program that's trying to encourage people and teach people about EV ownership. So this, for instance, is about if you go and fill out a survey saying, talking about your driving habits and if you'd be willing to, consider an EV and things like that, then you get entered in to win this gift card. But the program overall is trying to teach people about electric vehicles and what sort of options there are, and what are your concerns about, and there's different people you can talk to try to figure out if an EV is right for you. So it's a really nice program that is, I believe, free for Concord residents. So if you're interested in EV or EVs in general, you can talk to them and see what it's all about. It doesn't look like Nick has joined us. Laura, I don't know if you have anything that you want to add, or I'm happy to chat more about how we can collaborate. I think that obviously there's quite a bit between, CAB's mission and work and transportation and mobility, especially looking at low and no carbon options for multi-mobility and things like that. So I think there's definitely a lot of room for cross work and cross pollination, if you will.
Sure, Lauren, did you want to chime in?
Sure. Well, I'll just take an opportunity to introduce myself. I'm Laura Davis. I used to sit in on the CAB meetings, and I was sort of the liaison to the Mothers Out Front chapter here in Massachusetts. So I'm very familiar with the inner workings of CAB. I do think that there's so much opportunity for us to work together as the two committees. You will be happy to know that I have shown some of the pages from the Climate Action Plan in our meetings to educate the other members about what our priorities are as a town, because I was sitting in on the meetings while those pages were being updated or being created, excuse me. So yeah, I think there's lots of opportunity for collaboration here. Aaron did a great job of doing an overview of all the things that have happened this year. And I think there's a lot of exciting stuff happening in Concord. I think that there's always, you know, there are two things at play always, infrastructure and culture. And so figuring out ways to both build the infrastructure, create new services, and also making sure that the community is adequately engaged through that process so they feel invested in these new transportation options. They feel excited to take advantage of them. So I think that there's a lot of work that our two committees as well as CSEC could be doing together as we move forward. So I do hope that we have a way to keep in touch with each other, be on each other's agendas, are working towards it. I'm not the chair, I'm just a committee member, so I can't set the agendas. So I can't make any commitments, but I will say that that is certainly something that I'm excited about. So I'll turn it back over to you, Erin. You do a great job, so I'll be quiet.
I'm trying to get Nick into the meeting as well. He's having some trouble getting in.
Oh, yes.
He said he was having difficulty with the Zoom link.
Oh,
so I will try to do that quickly if anybody else has any comments.
You need to repost the Zoom link. It was in a PDF, it was in a photograph format. You couldn't copy it or click on it in the agenda.
Oh, thanks for that, Pamela. I appreciate that feedback. We
had to type it in.
Oh.
And then it asked for the password.
Got it. Well, we will fix that.
That's why I'm late.
Yeah.
We will fix that for next time. We've been, we did update the meeting time, obviously, and maybe something got mixed up with the Zoom link, but thank you for letting us know.
It'd be good if the town calendar had a way of click on town calendar thing and get the Zoom link directly from that.
True.
It's a safety issue, unfortunately.
A safety issue?
Yeah, because it having an extra step makes it less likely for Zoom bombers to get into the meetings. I know.
Hi, Nick. I apologize that it was difficult for you to get in. Aaron just walked through with us. So I mean, good timing, although you did miss a little bit, but Aaron just walked through the roadmap and kind of walked through all the bullet items that we talked about together just, a few weeks ago, the three of us. So I don't know, if you want to add anything, or maybe better for any of the CAB members to ask questions. I'm sure Nick could chime in, with thoughts and
that's a good place to start.
So
see what it brought up.
Yeah, I just wanted to open it up, I guess, to for any.
I can't hear.
Yeah, I can't hear you either.
I'm sorry. I'm trying. Can you hear me now? Okay.
Yeah, it's better when you're closer. It's also sounds a bit like you're speaking in a tin can.
I might be. I'm in a hotel and I can't, so I have no control over my Wi-Fi connection. So we're just doing the best we can here. Okay. So anyway, open it up for any CAB members to ask questions and or respond with comments, anything that was shared on the roadmap so far. Yeah, Brian.
So one question I had, just high level, I think the population density in Concord is like 700 people per square mile, which is kind of dense, but not really dense. I think Somerville is like 14,000 or something. How does it, I believe that affects like what are the right or the feasible transportation approaches for Concord versus Cambridge, and obviously limits what you can do and can't do. What's our general thinking and like what works when you have this kind of intermediate population density?
My opinion, it's, as you're hinting at, it's sort of economics, and I suspect that anything we do Well, let me talk about ride services first. Things like buses or, picking people up someplace and taking them someplace. I think those are clearly going to have to be subsidized by the town to some degree. Maybe in the long run, not so much, but either the town or businesses or individuals who support it are going to have to, come up with some money. It's sort of a minor version of what you're seeing with the MBTA. I mean, there are a lot of problems with the MBTA, management problems, but there's also a fundamental issue about the model, the financing model for any kind of transportation agency, and I think we have to think about that. We have to confront it at some point. But
let me just say too that Nick joined us. Nick is the chair of the Transportation Advisory Committee. Just wanted to make sure that you all knew that in case it wasn't said before.
So I will add. So I think Nick got to part of the answer there, but I think that part of what we're trying to do is we hear a lot that there's not enough connection between, for instance, Concord Center and West Concord, or there's issues with connection between some of our larger employers in town, like, Emerson, and like, could we better connect Emerson to the MBTA, or could we better connect, the campus up at Virginia Road to the Concord Center, or something like that. So I think that at least initially it's going to be looking at how do we connect those sort of larger hubs to try to help reduce the number of cars that are driving around town and try to create some sort of a transportation network. It's not going to look like a Cambridge or like a Boston, because unfortunately we don't have the density, and I think that it would be difficult to run something that would be economically feasible, but also would be actually useful for people, because I think that it would take an awfully long time to stop by everybody's house like it would at like a school bus almost. So we could have some bus stops or things like that, but I think it'd be a little bit different than, say, having those sort of hubs where we could direct people to, because it wouldn't necessarily be that if you lived by Virginia Road, you couldn't use that to get into Concord Center or something like that. It wouldn't only be for workers, say. And I think that that's sort of the key, is to allow it, like the Concord Trolley right now, it's geared towards tourists because it's hitting those tourist destinations, but it's certainly not only for tourists. And we hear a lot of locals that use it and really enjoy it and are really hoping we get funding again for the future so we can continue the service.
That is, remind us how that's being funded. Is it a grant that we got for that?
Right now it's being funded through the town through ARPA funds. And we are hopeful in the future. We're waiting to hear back on a grant, and we have a couple of other opportunities that we're going to be advocating to get funding through. So we're hopeful. We have a couple of different avenues to work through, but fingers crossed it'll all work out, and we'll have funding for the next couple of years for it'd be seasonal, still sort of geared towards tourism, but we're hoping to it'll be expanded and working with Lexington and Lincoln to create that regional transportation as well.
John, did you had a question?
Yeah, I had a couple, well, I guess 2 questions. So, in terms of the climate action plan, I'm trying to remember exactly how the transportation emissions were quantified. I think it was from vehicle odometer data. I can't remember if we counted like all the miles or only the miles traveled within the town. But obviously commuting into the city is a big source of emissions, whether we're counting all of it or not. So I'm wondering how that might play into the town's transportation planning. And then I guess in terms of the bus having some kind of regional bus system, it's been a lot of time on Martha's Vineyard, which has a Vineyard Transit Authority, and there's a pretty good bus system there, right? And the island has a year-round population of about 20,000 people, so it's not that different than Concord. I assume the state is giving them a lot of subsidies, but I don't actually know how the financing works. But it's a pretty good bus system. You know, it has regular stops, but also picks up and drops people off wherever they want. And I'm wondering if there's a way to think big on some kind of transportation, some kind of bus system like that might operate regionally.
It's definitely something that we have been looking at and has been discussed. There was something several years ago that the pandemic sort of squashed, but we're hopeful that in the future we might be able to sort of revive it and get funding again to do something similar, if not the same. There are similar services running in other places. There's a service out in the Berkshires, I believe, that has been pretty successful. So we're looking to to sort of see where we can take ideas and replicate them, or work with our regional partners to find something that works for Concord and for our region. Because even though we can compare ourselves to other places, we all know that Concord is very special, and we need to make sure we have a tailored situation for here.
Yeah, I'd say also, ultimately, the sort of metrics we're concerned about, it isn't just getting rides for people, it's trying to reduce automobile usage, and it's trying to get, single individuals out of cars. Erin is beginning to work with Concord Academy. There's some stuff going on there because their current plan that they have before the town for their Performing Arts Center requires that they dump 57 parking spaces out of their property onto the public streets. And so Erin's trying to work with them, finding ways to reduce the amount of car use that's necessary by their employees, the faculty and staff. So, I mean, those are the metrics like that are what really are going to help the climate, is if we can get people out of their cars one way or the other. And that's really the metric we're looking for. Short term, we're just trying to get this thing to life now, some sort of bus service, by taking grant money and building some experience, finding out what works. One of the exciting things about working the stuff that's seasonal for the tourists and visitors is the businesses really support it. So, so that's promising. If we can get a little funding out of businesses and some of the nonprofits in town, I think, that will help us get it going. The select board always seems to respond well when somebody else is putting up some money and then loosening the town's purse strings a bit. So, we're looking to do that.
I'll note too that we've heard from people for a long time that they would really like to come to Concord, but they don't want to have to drive, for instance, from Boston if they're visiting in the area. And they always say, can I take the train? Is it easy to walk around? And the answer is yes, if you have enough time, but it takes time to walk between the different areas. And so people find having a car more convenient if they're trying to get to Walden Pond and to the Orchard House and to the North Bridge and over to Lexington. And so we've had a lot of people come using the train, and we're able to get onto the trolley, and we're able to get around either using the bike share by renting bikes in Concord Center or in West Concord, and are able to use different ways to get around and don't have to rent a car or don't have to be bringing their vehicles into Concord, which is great. And I mean, that's not only, relieving that stress on our roads, but it's also allowing us to explore these options for the future. And, how can we make this a place where you don't have to necessarily take your car every time you want to go out of the house? So I think it's all a learning experience. And I think if we can provide that for people that are coming to visit us, then that's a great opportunity to learn for our own residents as well.
Yeah, one of the great underutilized resources in that regard is the weekend MBTA. I haven't checked the schedule of the commuter rail recently, but before the pandemic, it turned out there were trains that came on Saturday and Sunday that would come to Concord in the morning. And then there are convenient trains back around 4:30 and then later in the evening. So if you can solve the riddle of how to help them get around town once they're here, there's great transportation, or there used to be, available for getting people in and out of the town. So that's part of the challenge. Frankly, it's a little hard sometimes to get the businesses motivated to put up a couple of bucks to help this stuff. So that's an area we need to learn about.
Brian, you had a follow-up question.
Yeah, so 2 follow-ups. One is I've seen our bike rentals around, or not, what are the bike programs called, around Concord. Come to think of it, I don't know that I've seen a lot of them in the main train Concord depot, but I don't go around there too often, so I'm curious about that as an option.
So
and secondly,
oh, sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, second question. I'm curious and I haven't thought about this in a long time, what the kind of rise of e-bikes and scooters and those one-wheel things, if those are seen as like a potentially like viable form of transport, a non-automobile form of transport around Concord. And I'll just say, in my experience, I used to ride my bike to work and back. When it's hot and you're going to sweat, like it's kind of an inconvenience. But if on an e-bike, which actually had like an old, like before e-bikes were cool, I had a kit on mine. And it was awesome because you could get around and you didn't sweat if you didn't want to. And for me, it was viable. And even for people that may not want to like pedal a lot, it's viable. So I'm just curious about that.
So I'll start with the bike share. So we currently only have 2 locations, one in Concord Center behind the visitor center, and the other one is in West Concord, just before you get to the bridge that goes over the Neshoba Brook by the Bruce Freeman Rail Trail. Yeah. So the town does not own any lands. Well, that's not true. We own a very small parcel next to the train station in Concord Center in the Throw Depot area. If you go into that area, you'll see a water fountain that has a piece of land about that big around it. That is the piece of land that the town owns in the Throw Depot area. That is the only parcel that we own. So it's not quite big enough for adding a bike rack there, but we have thought about seeing if we can partner with one of the businesses over there, or see if we could get a parking spot at Crosby's or something like that, to put a bike share in there. I've also talked to a couple of other areas that I think would be of interest to people to visit, so that they could go and say, ride their bike to one of the visitor hot spots in town, and able to, then dock their bike, wander around for a while, and then be able to pick up another bike to head home, instead of having to either walk their bike around with them or worry about getting charged for all that time that they're exploring. So having those sort of different opportunities, I think, will really open it up for people being able to bike around more, as well as being able to put more things like, if we're able to, increase signage and things like that, so it's easy for people to find their way around. Because we do find that people get off the train and sometimes they call the visitor center and say, I'm in Concord Center, but I can't figure out where to go. How do I get to the North Bridge? So we're looking at increasing some wayfinding and things like that as well. Oh, and your second question was about electric bikes and scooters and things like that. So in terms of rentals, we're starting small, and looking at, we've been approached by a scooter company, but we said that we'd hold off on that for right now. In terms of transportation, I think that it's, electric bikes are going to be, I see that Laura put her hand. We talked about this earlier today. I think that there's definitely a place for all these different things. I don't personally know anything about those little the wheelie things that you stand on. I think I would fall right off of one, but I think that there's definitely opportunities, and it's gonna be a learning curve. We're going to see these kinds of things pop up, and we don't know necessarily what we don't know is coming, but I think that we would have to address them as they come. And for instance, things like scooters we're already seeing in the area, and that might mean that, setting policies, for instance, on if, scooters are deemed extremely dangerous or something, to try to figure out how to work with people, you know, things like that, to try to make sure that we're hitting all our transportation options and keeping people safe at the same time, making sure they're wearing helmets and things like that.
Yeah, having ridden my bike in the center from the trail, the the small rail trail, I can't blanking on the name of it, I was right by it, but to like the train station, there's, you know, definitely safety comes to mind for me, and I think a couple of our board members have talked about that a little bit already. So Ben, you had your hand up. You have a comment?
Just want to, comment on the bike sharing. Have you thought about partnering with a Blue Bike or something like that? Having come from Cambridge, I'm already a subscriber to Blue Bike. So like as a user or user experience perspective, I don't want to have to download another app for the Concord bike. I won't use it because it's not a seamless user experience. Whereas if you're kind of partnered or parlayed in with Blue Bike, which is ubiquitous throughout the greater Boston area, that might help incentivize further use of the bike sharing. But just as a thought, as a Blue Bike user myself.
Yeah, no, I completely get it. As somebody who never has enough space on my phone to download another app when I'm asked to do it for whatever purpose, I end up, you know, sitting there deleting photos or trying to figure out what app I can delete. We reached out to Blue Bike and they weren't able to partner with us at the time that we were starting the bike share, whether they didn't have the capacity at that time, like not enough bikes, or we were trying to start too small for them. I'm not quite sure. But it's definitely something that, you know, in the future, when we're thinking about sort of expansion and things like that, we might be looking to them. We usually go out to bid for these kinds of things. So we'll reach out to various companies and see what the opportunities are and who sort of matches up with what we're looking to do.
Yeah, that'd be great, because if I were living in Cambridge, and I used to visit Concord quite a bit when I was in Cambridge, it would be awesome to know, like, oh, I'll take the metro and then I'll hop on a Blue Bike when I get there, type of thing, because I'm already used to that experience, whatnot. But anyway,
it's a good point.
It does cost to install a Blue Bike station. I forget how much, but it's quite substantial. So in Cambridge, the city's paid for a number, but also a lot of businesses and the institutions have also paid for them, which could be an option in some cases, but it's not a matter of Blue Bikes just being interested.
I can ask another question if you like. So how do you view level 2 versus level 3 chargers, and what's your strategy for rolling those out? Do you have a preference for level 3 versus level 2?
I don't. That is electrification of the town's cars is not a primary thing. It's not on our roadmap, and it's not something. There's so much we have to do in the transportation area. It's not an area we're choosing to get involved in.
Understandable. Okay, sorry.
No, well, I'm glad you brought that up, because it was one of the actions on our plan, which I thought was interesting. So it's in the climate action plan. I don't know if that's where you saw it then. Maybe. So that's, it is sort of the provision, or at least the goal of kind of furthering the conversation about infrastructure for people who want to use electric vehicle, or maybe at some point it's not just electric, but is something that kind of find my agenda here and all my windows that are open.
And Courtney, I can say too that we I think that was something that our sustainability directors were working on very closely with our with CMLP, with our light plant. Right. And they I know that we got several grants to help install a couple of chargers, and we're continuing to look at those options. I spoke to somebody recently. They're looking at the ability to install chargers in place like at businesses or at apartment complexes, things like that, so that we can continue to allow that to be an option. I'm not super involved in it, so I don't know a lot about it. And like Nick said, it's not part of our roadmap, but it's definitely not, it hasn't fallen off our radar, and it's something that we're is definitely still being thought about.
Yeah, and just to make a note, I mean, that makes sense. It was, CMLP was kind of the primary champion for that. It also mentioned an EV working group, and I'm just curious, does that still exist? That's still in, okay.
Yes, it does still exist. I think that it's probably slowed down a little bit without the sustainability director, but I know that the group from CMLP still meets pretty regularly.
Okay. All right. I'm not sure who was first. Gavin, how about you go first and then Laura?
I think Laura was first. She can
Oh,
go
okay.
if she still has.
No, that's okay. I can save my comment. I'll just give a public comment at the end. It's fine.
Okay. Sounds good. Thank you so much.
Yeah, I just want to ask a quick question about, you know, you talked about in the plan about like increasing like bicycle safety or bicycle mobility in the town. A lot of that could be done with, you know, on streets and bike lanes and shared lanes, which is very important. And then as well, have you guys thought about like other bike paths that could connect the town and connect the town to other towns? Obviously, you have the hot button issue of the Reformatory Branch Trail. Are there any plans on that, if you guys know anything about that? And then additionally to that, the Reformatory Branch Trail also has the connector between West Concord and Concord, not just the Concord Center to Bedford stretch. And so have you guys thought at all about sort of that being a viable connector as a walking and cycling path between the two centers of the town?
Well, the Reformatory Branch, if you're coming from Bedford, it ends at the river, just near Keyes Road in that area. Mm-hmm. There's no way across the river, so there's no continuity. You'd have to build a bridge, which would cost a fortune. A lot of permitting issues, given the nature of the wetlands there. So that's sort of off the table, I think. We've kind of kept our hands off the Reformatory Branch issue. It seems to be an emotion-laden issue in town with a lot of people with a lot of strong opinions about it. And it's probably, other than the Reformatory, other than the Bruce Freeman Rail Trail, it's the only potentially real trail that could be used for bicycles, either paved or unpaved, I think. There are a lot of trails in town, but most of those are on conservation land, and it's not consistent with the goals of the conservation programs to provide, you know, through thoroughfares for bicycle travel. So that's an issue I've discussed it with DDK, the Natural Resources Director, and it's a very difficult issue for them to wrestle with because of the nature of conservation land.
All right, got it. That's great info. Thank you.
I think Nick hit it on the head, but I will just add that the only two trails in town where bikes are allowed are the Bruce Freeman Rail Trail, obviously, and the Reformatory Branch Trail. All other trails, technically, you're only allowed to walk. So they really want to keep bikes off of those trails because some of them are in very sensitive natural areas that some people might not know that, for instance, there's, that there's areas that have delicate ecosystems and things like that they're trying very hard to protect and preserve.
Brad, you started to chime in. I know we've got some other, and I see your hand, although it's camouflaged by your wall, I think. That's interesting. I didn't see it at first. Go ahead.
So three quick, there was a bill last town meeting or an article to do an exploratory study of possibly paving the Reformatory Branch. I spoke out in favor of it obliquely. I was definitely in the minority. I know those bridges, well, we do have new bridges for the Bruce Freeman Rail Trail, and I'm thankful for those. And well, I'll take this offline. I'm trying to figure out how you actually would get to West Concord from Concord on their reformatory branch. But
yeah, I've on that point, I've actually walked the trail and like gone around when you get to the rivers, and like in theory there is a possibility, and it's all town-owned land. But like we talked about, it would be with like conservation groups. We'd have to talk about Concord Trails. It'd be like a whole host of different actors to do it, and we'd have to build 2 bridges. But yeah, I was wondering like what people thought about that. But yeah, that's good to know. Good to know.
And the last thing is, I didn't know bikes were allowed on no other public land, and I should probably amend my cycling habits.
No other the trails.
Okay.
So I agreed with something that John said earlier about the biggest nut as far as greenhouse gas emissions is lowering car trips from Concord to work at distances. And as a bicyclist, the one route which I think is absolutely terrible is Route 2A going to Lexington. And I don't know if that's if there's any chance of working together with other towns to make that a good bike road. It's an absolutely horrible road, and that actually goes from Concord to a place, where people might work and connect effectively.
It's not even a great road for cars, let alone for bikes.
The cars go too fast. Every time I drive along there, I look at how there is room, and you could do it. You'd need money and you'd need cooperation. I don't know is there anything there?
So that's something that's been brought up before. I think that it's a little bit tricky because it does span several different towns, and it goes through national park land. Not to say that nothing can be done, but I think that it's definitely a longer conversation. I will say that there's more momentum now, I think, to look at these kinds of things than we had previously. So I am encouraged, but we don't have anything in the works right now, but it's definitely something that's in the back of my mind.
Yeah, and one of the other issues is historical issues. All of our work, we're really careful to say that, it's important to do whatever we do while preserving the town character, which is an undefined term. And, when you're talking about going along Route 2A, which goes through historic lands and landscapes and other things, any changes are fraught with hairy discussions with those with historical interests about what you might do. So, and we're finding that that's a bit of an issue for any kind of changes to any roads in Concord. So, we're starting to engage with Historic Districts Commission, Historical Commission, to have discussions about sort of what's reasonable and what's not reasonable in terms of making changes that affect the appearance of these roads. Because if you want to have a complete streets program and allow for safe passage of bicycles, the roads really can't look the way they do now in the long run.
Ben, I thought you saw your hand up. Do you take it back down?
Just more curiosity on going back to the buses. Since we have kind of a Plug Power here in house within the town of Concord, has there been any discussion as far as kind of parlaying that knowledge into the electrification, instead of electrification, maybe a fuel cell bus system, et cetera? More just curiosity, since we do have Plug Power actually making the electrolyzers here. The biggest in fuel cells is supply, distribution. But if we have the actual one of the biggest players here in house, I thought maybe that would be a little bit more of an incentive, because the Californians are killing everybody as far as rolling out hydrogen way in advance of everybody else.
Not as far as I know. So our first big step was to get to a hybrid bus, and we've, for instance, looked at electric buses, but we don't think that the technology is there quite yet. And not to say that it wouldn't get there in the future. And I think that, we're hopeful to see what comes up, but as of right now, we're excited to have our hybrid and to start looking at other opportunities for getting people around.
Yeah, 100% agree with that. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Yeah, Ben, you mentioned Plug Power a couple of times. So the curious, I've lived here for 24 years. And I'm curious, and I've had zero interaction with Plug Power ever. I haven't seen a sign. I know where they are. Yeah. I'm curious, has anyone had any interaction with them? Have they ever done any outreach or any contact with anyone Concord on anything? Because I haven't seen it. I'm just curious.
Yeah, so they met with the Concord Business Partnership 2 months ago. They gave a full-on factory tour with the CBP. So that's all the 30, 40 business owners and whatnot. I know Steve Verrill and company, they were all out there going through the factory tour and whatnot. That's the extent of my knowledge of it, but I do know that there has been some interaction and whatnot.
Oh, that's cool.
Can I ask, does their technology involve electrolyzing water, or is it cracking natural gas?
They make the electrolyzers for water in West Concord locally. So to your point, there are many different ways to actually produce hydrogen through natural gas or actually stripping it out of water, or you can actually take it out of the atmosphere, et cetera, et cetera. So, but hydrogen is literally the most abundant element in the universe. So that's kind of if we're going to make a change to a new resource, why not go with the one that's the most abundant in the universe type of thing. So.
Thanks.
I think, so it's just one last topic that we touched on, Nick and Aaron and I, we chatted in preparation, was related to the school traffic. I think it's maybe just very poignant for me because I have 3 kids in Concord schools, and I am, driving a lot, especially in particular around high school, where
Brittany, I think we're losing you a little bit. It's very choppy.
The school bus issue, and in particular, can you hear me out? Only a little bit. All right. I will hold my question maybe for later.
Maybe turn
try
your
turning
camera off.
Yeah, try turning your camera off.
Thank you. We'll try. Can you hear me any better?
Yes.
A little bit, yeah.
All right, we'll go with this. All right, I'll try one more time. If it doesn't work, then Laura can go. So particular driving in and around the high school, that would be, I guess, one area where I see a ton of car traffic in and out. I know there's lots of conversations that have been had, but I don't know, Aaron and Nick, if you want to share a little bit. I know we had a brief conversation about some of the thoughts there. Anything else? Any I guess focus on that particular area.
This is about traffic around the schools.
Yes, and thinking of ways to.
Yeah, I can speak a little bit to that. After I was done with the Long Range Planning Committee, I briefly was on Climate Action Advisory Board for about a year. And it was right at the time when there was a warrant article about putting more parking at the high school. And so I dug into the issue, and I realized a few things. One is, there's a lot of traffic. There's too many cars going to the schools, all the schools. Another thing I realized is that the whole school bus model that's been implemented is a school bus model that works sort of for the elementary schools and doesn't work at all for the high school. And that's because by the time you're high school age, you're involved in extracurricular activities and sports to a great degree, and you're not going home when the bus wants to go home. I live in a house with 3 generations, and my granddaughter, if she stays at the middle school late, the late bus will drop her 2.5 miles from our house on a road with no sidewalks. So, I think the entire bus system, as it currently runs for the public schools, is inadequate for serving the student population. And it certainly doesn't help in terms of traffic of the schools. That's my position. But I've also found one more thing. I've also found it difficult to engage the school people about these issues. It's not at the top of their agenda, and they've always got big, educational issues that they're dealing with, or funding issues. And I think, they'd like to work on these issues, but I haven't really sensed that they have the bandwidth to do it.
Yeah, I would agree with Nick that I think that there's definitely a lot of interest. And whenever I talk to the superintendent, Lori Hunter, she's very excited and wants to be a part of, finding some different solutions. But things like COVID come up that pull a lot of focus and make it very difficult to move forward in other areas. And I think that unfortunately, in the way that schools work, there's always going to be something. So we're trying to find ways to work with them and to, for instance, engage with them more for safe routes to school and trying to find different opportunities there. We're starting sort of like a projects list so that when funding opportunities come up, we can sort of have a short list of projects to go so that we can get some of those things rolling, even if they're not necessarily able to, so that they're leading the project, even if they're not necessarily the ones that are paying attention to when the grants are coming up. So we want to make sure that they're a big part of the process and are leading it. But we also know that their bandwidth is short, so trying to help wherever we can to fill in those gaps. I think that transportation for students is a much larger conversation. That it's a difficult population to work with. Not to say that it's impossible, but it's a different. You can't just necessarily send them off walking by themselves if they live at the end of the road, like Nick is saying, especially if it's dark or something like that. So there's different factors to go into there, and it's a conversation we're going to be having more and more, I think, but we're not quite there yet and haven't solved it yet.
Yeah, I do think this is an area where the Transportation Advisory Committee and Climate Action Advisory Board could bring more weight to the discussion with the school department if we're talking together about it, because I think it is a potentially a large area to win. It's a difficult area to work. Even if they said we're ready, there are state laws regarding school buses, and I don't know what they all are, but it's not just something that we can do whatever we want. So it's a complicated space too. But I think if we can work with the Climate Action Advisory Board, it brings more weight to the discussion to the school committee.
All right, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Well, you can do that for a bit. Why don't you go ahead?
Oh. Never mind.
Look, go. Nothing.
It's in and out.
I can't even chat.
Might be able to use your Wi-Fi on your phone. Maybe that'll work a little bit better for you.
Ben, do you have a question while Courtney tries to get back on?
Yes, ma'am. I'm sorry. I'm super curious. So apologies. I'm kind of peppering you all with the questions, but I appreciate it. So just on the buses as well, since to your point, wholly agree, electrics, especially on the bus side, aren't necessarily there yet from a technology perspective. Have we looked at potentially offsetting fleet emissions within the town? And I'm not talking about like improved forestry management type of stuff, which is kind of intangible, but more hard, offsetting it as far as, paying a little bit more for your fuel, but actually offsetting it with clean energy development on the grid or something like that.
So the best people to ask about that would be the light plants. They deal with more of our things like RECs and things like that. They are much more in tune with things like our RECs and the purchase of those. In terms of actually offsetting the carbon, that would once again be something that more the sustainability director would be looking at. I haven't been looking too much into that.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate it.
Okay,
Good.
can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes.
Oh, good. I can't see many of you, so this is definitely imperfect. But Laura, I think you had your hand up and I was hoping to give you opportunity to share.
Sure. Well, first of all, I want to just say that this has been such an exciting conversation, and I've written so many notes and so many questions and things that I want to look into now. So thank you for asking so many great questions. And I wanted to just kind of, and Nick, please jump in and tell me if I'm totally off base here. But I want to say that, related to the questions about EVs and about offsets, like your question, Ben, I would say that, what we've been working on primarily at the Transportation Advisory Committee is multimodal transit and like shifting, how do we shift people out of their, single passenger vehicles? That's like much of what we've talked about is, how do we get people to take public transit? How do we get people to ride bikes instead of driving? And just a few, because I'm a data person, according to the long range plan, which was finished in 2018, so the data is a little low, there were about 17,500 cars in the town of Concord. That's privately registered vehicles, not municipal vehicles, privately registered vehicles. And our population as of 2021 was a little over 18,000. So that means roughly one car for every man, woman, and child in the town of Concord. So it gives you an idea of like how many cars, the scale of driving in Concord to a certain extent. And, we know that, about 30% of trips are less than a mile in the US. And, a very large percentage of trips, I'd have to look up the numbers again. I feel like it was something around 58% of trips is under 5 miles or something like that. So we know that there's a really huge opportunity for short trips to be shifted away from single passenger vehicles or single occupancy vehicles. I think that a lot of the things that we've been talking about are how do we get people out of their cars? How do we make that feel safe and comfortable and like practical for people who are used to driving their cars for a lot of things. And that has a lot to do with first mile, last mile. And obviously there are larger regional issues that our committee hasn't really had a chance to dig into yet. Like how do we improve the MBTA is something that's come up at many meetings, but we haven't really figured out next steps on like, how do we advocate for better service or more accessible platforms? These are things that we've talked about, but haven't really come up with next steps for yet because they're complicated. And just related to e-bikes, because e-bikes were mentioned, and Erin knows that this is my thing. I know from personal experience that e-bikes are a complete game changer, especially in a town like Concord, where it's only about 5 miles from end to end. And an e-bike makes that an imminently bikeable distance, even for somebody like me who has terrible asthma and is totally non-athletic and is usually carrying a child and a full load of groceries. So, I think that there's a lot of opportunity to educate people about e-bikes, but infrastructure is always the big challenge when you talk to people about why wouldn't they bike? It's usually because they're afraid to bike on 62 across Route 2. They're afraid to bike on Sudbury Road. And one thing that I do want to say is that we had a really excellent experience over the summer. Nick and myself and our UNH fellow went to Ag Day and put out a booth and just talked to residents and visitors about their transportation preferences, about the barriers to accessing those preferred transportation options over cars, and got some really excellent data. And so I'm just putting that out there because I think that there's an opportunity for the committees, CSEC, CAB, the TAC, to be out in the community more to socialize these new ideas, to gather data, really specific data about okay, so where are the intersections where you feel unsafe sending your high school student to school on a bicycle? How do we address those things? Because once you get out into the community and you start talking to people, the priorities fall into place relatively quickly. I mean, we heard Route 2, Route 2, Route 2, Route 2 all day long at Ag Day. So, that's a tough nut to crack. It'll take a lot of work to fix that. But, once we know what the priorities are, we can start working in a more dedicated way on addressing those barriers. So anyway, I want to just also offer an invitation. I am happy to bike and or walk with any member of your committee any day of the week. Please call me. Love to like talk about this in the field, seeing places around Concord where like I would love, Galvin, if you want to walk that connection between, I had no idea that there was a path between Concord and West Concord. So I would love to come and walk that with you. So yeah, I'll shut up.
That's great. This has been a great conversation. You may have noticed, I mean, first I should ask, can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Okay.
Suddenly it's great. What happened?
You sound great now, yeah.
Okay, I switched to my phone. I guess Wi-Fi here in the hotel is poor at best. Okay, but I think this has been a great conversation. I kind of chucked the agenda out the window, which is fine, because I think you know, this was more important, and it was a great first share between our two committees. I think for CAB, you know, one thing that comes up for me, I would like us to go back to our footprint. So we have what, you know, we have the main one and the update, I think, are the main two sources of data that I'm thinking of. But go back to our carbon footprint, you know, that was published in Sustainable Concord, and just personally like to understand. I think, John, you asked the question early on in the meeting. You know, what were we assuming in that? Like, what does, you know, what do the emissions that are represented there? How did we determine those? Because that could, you know, that could help us to inform then sort of how it lines up with some of the initiatives that we're talking about. And I think something that we've kind of talked around today, but Aaron and Nick and I think talked directly to, is how can CAB and or CSEC, and you know, potentially, but how can we kind of bring the climate conversation into some of the work that TAC is doing, you know, and make sure that we're able to back it up with, you know, good data, and what is the climate benefit of some of these important initiatives that we're working on, especially, you know, if they cost money, and most of them do. And, you know, that's important to the select board, right? What added benefit, you know, what are the multiple benefits are we getting out of some of these opportunities that we're looking at that offsets, or at least, you know, provides maybe a unquantifiable, but in some cases quantifiable benefit that equates to that economic cost that, you know, we might have to cover. So I think that's something that CAB can continue conversation on. John, I see you have your hand up, and if you want to add to that.
No, it seemed like the theme night was, I mean, there are a lot of issues around transportation. So carbon emissions are just one. There's traffic congestion, and other issues like that. And somehow we have, and I think there's a lot of work being done that's sort of happening on separate tracks. I think it seems like the challenge is, how do we bring it together and address transportation comprehensively? I think looking at our emissions more closely might be useful. Probably our way we've inventoried our transportation emissions is not really that comprehensive, but you know, I was thinking of like commercial traffic and those emissions. But I think having some kind of comprehensiveness to the planning would help. And even with, like, you know, if we're going to shift people out of their cars, and the town would have to get serious about bike infrastructure, because it's not going to happen by itself. It has to be done intentionally. You know, Cambridge is doing that now. It's very controversial. But the infrastructure is just not going to happen, or happen only when people are okay with it. So I think it's a big effort. And then I just want to say around offsets, I'm not a big fan of going down that road. I think we should really focus on trying to reduce emissions directly. There's a lot of issues, brought up some with around RECs, but even with other offsets that I think are problematic, and it's best, in my view, just to focus on cutting emissions first. Then we can revisit offsets when we're in a position to have them make a difference when they're hard to reduce emissions.
Here we go again.
Yeah, my virtual hand isn't working, so I'll use my real one.
That's okay. Go ahead, Nick.
Back when one issue, I think you were talking about sort of the modeling that's behind the action plan, right? And when that was getting going, I don't know if it changed, but I was really disappointed with it when it was getting going, because it was based on general models that weren't necessarily the way Concord is, and so, and to me, it had very little value. If you're trying to make decisions based on, well, if we reduce this, what will the impact be? Well, we don't know, because we didn't have a model based on Concord. We had a general model for communities or something. So I think, the relevance of the modeling to Concord's actual experience is very important from my point of view, if you really want to make a difference. The other thing is that I picked up from what John was saying, we probably should be collecting data from people who are using any ride services that we offer to try to find out, is their presence on the bus actually reducing anything? Are they using the bus instead of a car? Would they have come to town in a car today anyway? Or are they just opportunistically using the bus and, it was there, and it really, the truth is it has no impact on the climate. So, we need to collect data. I think there's a message for Aaron. We need to really get some data that's going to help us in the future figure out if these services that we're doing through grants, what sort of impact they're having on the climate, or what we can claim. And the better the data is, the more believable we'll be when we go to ask the select board for money.
Right.
Oh, sorry. I'll just add that we are collecting some data. Don't worry, Nick. We have a survey that's people, unfortunately, has to be voluntary. We can't force people to take it, but we are asking people, how they came to Concord, what they're looking for out of the service, things like that. So we're anxious to see what it will eventually show us after the pilot project's done in mid-November. But also, I just wanted to note, John, that don't worry, we're trying to take a comprehensive look. That's the idea behind the study. We really want to take a more holistic look and make sure that we're really trying to capture everything that's going on, and not just looking at it too piecemeal. Because I think that as of yet, projects have been very ad hoc, especially when funding comes up, because that's kind of how these kinds of things get funded. But if we can take a more holistic approach, and at least have some sort of a plan, even when funding comes up, we can try to make it a little bit more strategic and less ad hoc.
Yeah, so just, I think one more thing, one more item I'll mention, and then we're getting close to time, and I want to make sure to give Pamela time to speak, or any other public for that matter. I don't know if Andy's still on or not. Yep, okay. So I'm sorry, I'm like scrolling back and forth on my phone. I can only see 4 of you at a time. So I can't tell if you have your hand up, and I'm not calling on you, I apologize. I'll make sure to scroll here in a moment. But going back, I think to the carbon, the greenhouse gas emission calculations, I know it is an awful lot of data, and sometimes hard to source that data. And I do think the first effort was a more general look at transportation for a town similar to Concord, using a database that was more readily available. but we were also trying to put together the entire footprint and trying to put together the entire action plan at the same time. And so it sort of made sense to use something that was more readily available at the time. But I wonder if now, that we are trying to dig into some of these areas related to transportation and mobility more, that maybe, hopefully when we get the director position filled, maybe that is something that we could look at. What would it take to do a bit more detailed, Concord specific footprint for transportation to help to further the conversation and the arguments towards some of these things, at least from a climate perspective. That's what we can do. John, I appreciate your comments. There are many factors that go into mobility, and that's true for several of the areas that we look at. But I think, my hope in having this conversation today is that we figure out in what ways can we, as folks who care about the climate and want to see that further, how can we bring that argument to the table in a compelling way that drives action. So that was the hope. I just want to, before I turn it over for public comment, I just want to thank Erin and Nick again for coming in, for sharing, your thoughts and all the important work that you're doing, and Laura on the Transportation Advisory Committee. And thank you to CAB for, your thoughtful questions and comments. I think this is a really good first conversation on this. Hopefully not the last time, at least as long as I'm chair, I'll see to that. So with that, I do, you'll note we had our check-ins on the calendar, of course, or on the agenda. Jake isn't here. And I think we can save the other two for a future meeting. And hopefully maybe by that future meeting, I'll have an update on the planning board as well. So with that, right on time, actually, I'll offer or open to public comments for whomever would like to. Pamela, you've had your hand up, so why don't you go ahead?
Thank you. Pamela Dritt, 13 Concord Green, Unit 4. I think this has been a wonderful, interesting meeting. I'm sorry I missed it.
You didn't miss the meat of it, Pamela.
But I thought I was interested in the Sustainability Director Search Update and the School Committee Sustainability Report and the Roadmap Overview. And I didn't get to hear any of those, but I I remember what the last Sustainability Director said as a succinct sort of guiding principle, which was electrify everything and green the grid. And I think that might work as an overweening first principle for both these committees. And remember, when you're considering various options, to also include the cost of not doing it. When you look at the cost of buying a new electric school bus, which is 3 times the cost of buying a new gasoline bus, you have to also consider that it saves over $4,000 per bus per year just in maintenance costs. And it provides mobile backup batteries for the grid that can be used in emergencies. And it saves our kids' lungs and brains. There have been studies that have demonstrated a difference in math and English scores and IQ between kids who rode diesel buses and those who rode cleaner buses. And those aren't quantifiable. plus the cost of the fossil fuel infrastructure. That's the problem I have with hydrogen fuel cell. In order to have that widely used, you would have to have a hydrogen delivery system. And that's a massive infrastructure with tankers and everything, which electric vehicles don't require. Plus, already on the cost of generating electricity, the cost of solar plus battery and wind plus battery is lower even than hydropower. Right now, lower than natural gas. In fact, you can build a new solar plus battery backup or wind plus battery power plant and operate it for less than the cost of operating a new gas power plant. There have been a lot of really interesting recent research done on the disruption of that. So that I think that what we need in Concord is more electrify everything and green through Concord Municipal Light Plant, the grid. Support the things that's electric transportation and electric buildings. And the mothers out front is very good at the dangers of natural gas in the home. So
thank you. Thank you for your comments. Those are all very interesting. And I think many of us on this committee understand, your position and where you're coming from for sure.
So one last comment, which is if the transportation isn't going to immediately switch to 100% electric school buses, we need to at least stop digging the hole we're in, stop buying diesel. No more buying of diesel or fossil fuel buses. The life of the bus is already cheaper to buy electric, even with the higher upfront cost. We shouldn't waste more money supporting fossil fuel infrastructure that's killing the planet.
Thank you for your comments, Pamela. I appreciate it. I just want to give Laura a chance. I believe your hand was up. I don't know if that was new. Okay.
Yes, this is not transportation related. So this is very public comment. This is actually just a question for you guys, which is, has the Climate Action Advisory Board considered bringing to the select board a proposal to make us one of the new municipal opt-in communities? The DOER recently released a municipal opt-in code that is a step above the existing stretch code. We are a stretch code community right now. I believe that the language is going to be finalized and ready to adopt at town meeting next year, and could go into effect like 6 months after it's adopted at town meeting. But obviously, some group within the town would have to be preparing for putting something on the warrant. And since we don't have a director of sustainability, who I'm sure would be the person who's in charge of this kind of thing, I wanted to just ask if you guys have talked about it or plan to talk about it at an upcoming meeting.
I don't think we had a plan to talk about it, but we do now.
Great.
Thank you. Thank you for bringing it up.
And the one thing that I will say, one of the reasons that I have become increasingly interested in the municipal opt-in code is that, as you all, I'm sure, are aware, the 10-town community pilot that was built into the legislation that was passed this summer that would allow 10 communities to ban fossil fuels, that's contingent on whether the community meets its affordable housing quotas. And there's a big question mark over whether Concord will qualify if the Junction Village project doesn't move forward. So I think that this is another pathway that we could be pursuing. It wouldn't ban fossil fuels in new construction. Unfortunately, it's a weaker stretch code than a lot of advocates were hoping for, but it does provide some significant improvements in terms of energy efficiency requirements for new buildings and helps tip the scales in favor of heat pumps and other electrification measures. So just want to put that on your radar.
Thank you.
And if you need to be connected to somebody who knows more about this, I don't know as much about it as I wish I did, but I know people who know more about it. So let me know if you need to be connected with anybody.
No, that'd be great. That'd be great. I'll try to follow up with you on that. And maybe, hopefully, I know we were waiting to hear back on the 10 community opportunity, and I don't know if the select board has gotten communication back from what they sent or not. John's shaking his head, so
I'm guessing
sure.
that they won't hear back because the regulations haven't been issued yet.
Right.
On the opt-in energy, the net zero code that's coming out, is it known whether town meeting has to adopt it or if the selectmen? Well, I believe with the current stretch energy code, the select board just voted to opt in, but didn't require town meeting action.
Very often,
That would be very exciting.
Very often there are things that have to go to town meeting if it's going to be a major change, or depending on what's the like if it's changing of certain policies or codes, they do have to go to town meeting. Other things don't. So that's a question for the town manager's office probably.
Yeah.
Okay, but worth at least hearing a little bit more about. So we'll see if we can. Garner some more information on that before our next meeting. With that, we are at time. Pamela, did you still have something you wanted to share?
Just one quick thing there, that Christopher Heights Junction Village is dead because the developer has withdrawn, and the select board did not vote even to send him a letter asking him in support of the project. So that's very, very sad.
Okay.
But also, if we can get there, we'll have the future in which we have autonomous vehicles that use the road and can be very cheap because there isn't drivers. Electric vehicles. So in the future planning that we do, we should keep that in mind.
Sounds good. Sounds good. Thank you for the update. Appreciate that. And with that, we are at time for tonight. I do apologize for my technical difficulties. Thank you for bearing with me. I wish I'd switched to the phone at the beginning. I didn't think about that. But, so we will plan to meet in person on November 16th. I think I told you, John. And I will keep you posted on the details of our location. But I'll look forward to seeing you all hopefully in person in a month or so. All right. With that, I've learned I can just adjourn the meeting. No motion. I don't have a gavel. All I can do is hit the button. But so with that, our CAB meeting for October 19th, 2022 is adjourned. Thank you all for coming. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Bye.
Nice to see everybody again. See you next month.
Bye.